So the idea of this workshop is to introduce you to a bunch of writing principles, beginning with perhaps the most important writing principle of all, the force of focus. So the force of focus is something we use every day in the human trafficking clinic and every day in the child advocacy clinic. And I'm pretty sure the other clinics use it too. They just don't call it this yet. A kind of basic way to understand the force of focus is the difference between saying a glass is half full and a glass is half empty. But we want to get to something a bit more sophisticated. So we're going to have this principle as the force of focus. So the words you choose can change the world people see. So Mr. Jordan, we're going to try out your microphone. Because when we talk about the force of focus in the legal context, we're really talking about advocacy. So we kind of need a working definition of advocacy. One way to define advocacy is, and then read the first one.
The best words in the best order.
Or advocacy is.
Getting something right in language.
Or advocacy is.
Making order out of chaos.
So we're going to give some content to these definitions, and to do that, we're going to get some help. So we're going to get some macro level help from an economist or a psychologist who won the Nobel Prize for economics named Daniel Kahneman and his book Thinking Fast and Slow. We're going to get some micro level help from the world of medical malpractice. And then finally, we're going to get a kind of conceptual model from Elle Woods and Legally Blonde. So that's going to be really exciting. Stick around for that. But first, Mr. Jordan, we're going to talk about sports. So, Mr. Jordan, do you recognize this photo?
No.
Okay, good. So I'm a little curious how you came into the University of Michigan without knowing about this photo, but I get to tell you about it. So in 2013, Michigan's football team played South Carolina in the Outback Bowl. And at one point during the game, one of the defensive ends on South Carolina broke through the Michigan line and tackled one of our running backs so hard that his helmet popped off. So you can actually see it a little bit better there. Like there's the ball, there's the helmet. And it was played over and over again on ESPN. It was sort of like, if anyone's ever seen the butt fumble, it was like right up there with plays, which is really sad. I mean, imagine being this guy's mom and seeing your little boy decapitated over and over again on ESPN. But that actually wasn't the saddest photo in the game, Mr. Jordan. This was the saddest photo. And this was the saddest photo because all game, Michigan was winning. Until 11 seconds left, South Carolina threw a touchdown pass and won the game. And so what we're going to look at is how the Detroit Free Press tried to capture this moment. And we're going to look at that headline. So in the Detroit Free Press, the next day, the headline read this, Mr. Jordan.
Gamecocks' big plays produce bitter end to season.
And that's a really good headline. That's really good writing. And we're going to try and figure out why. And two questions are going to help us. One, and they're questions that you always want to ask anytime you sit down to do a piece of writing. Who is the audience? What is the function? So, Mr. Jordan, who is the audience of the Detroit Free Press?
Presumably Michigan fans.
And what is the function? What is that headline trying to do?
It's trying to capture their misery for them.
Great. Exactly. It's trying to capture the hurt. That's wonderful, Mr. Jordan. Why are they trying to do that? Why is the Detroit Free Press trying to do that?
It wants them to feel that the Detroit Free Press sympathizes with their pain.
Yeah, it's a sense of we know what it was like for you to watch this game where we were up the entire time and then we lost. So we wanted to create that headline. That's really good writing. That's really good writing for the Detroit Free Press. That would be terrible writing for the Charleston Post and Courier, which is a newspaper for South Carolina. So what a good headline for the Charleston Post and Courier would be, Mr. Jordan.
South Carolina beats Michigan in thrilling Outback Bowl.
So tell me the difference between those headlines in terms of the focus. What's the focus of the first one? Why do they focus on bitter?
The first one is from the perspective of a Michigan fan, and the second one is from the perspective of a South Carolina fan.
That's super important because it's the same game. Every time you sit down to work on a case, you're faced with this problem. One experience will look very differently to two sets of people. How are you going to use language to capture that experience? If you wrote in the Detroit Free Press, South Carolina beats Michigan in thrilling Outback Bowl, you're fired, right? One way to think about this is essentially it's the difference between saying, look, this game, Michigan lost. If I say that, Jordan, look, there was a game, Michigan lost. What do you focus on?
Nothing.
Nothing?
I mean, I focus on the outcome of the game.
Well, who's to blame if I say Michigan lost?
So, can you say what you said again?
Yeah. So the difference between saying, look, Michigan lost versus South Carolina won.
Oh, I see. Yeah, it places Michigan in the position of blame.
Right, so you might focus on sort of like the bad defensive back coverage or a missed opportunity. Whereas South Carolina won, you're focusing your attention on a completely different thing. And this is what brings us to Daniel Kahneman. So Daniel Kahneman has this wonderful book, Thinking Fast and Slow, where he talks through an example from the 2006 World Cup. So Ms. Rachel, you want to read what Daniel Kahneman writes?
Italy and France competed in the 2006 World Cup. The next two sentences both describe the outcome. Italy won, France lost.
And the real question Daniel Kahneman asked is this, Ms. Rachel.
Do those statements mean the same thing?
And what Kahneman suggests is for economists, they do mean the same thing. Like, it's just the outcome of the game. But then he says, look, for human beings, those are very different things. So, Ms. Rachel, you want to keep reading?
Italy won evokes thoughts of the Italian team and what it did to win. France lost evokes thoughts of the French team and what it did to lose, including the memorable headbutt of an Italian player by the French star Zinedine Zidane.
Zinedine Zidane. Keep reading, Ms. Rachel?
In terms of the associations they bring to mind, the two systems really mean different things.
And again, this is super important. What are the words that you want your reader to think about? Do you want the reader to think about the Italian goalkeeper, the Italian penalty kicker? Or do you want the reader to think about the bad judgment of Zinedine Zidane? Another example. So in the 1996 Olympics, Nike came out with this really cool ad campaign where they're trying to make the Americans into these just ultimate winners. They're not going to settle for anything less. So they had a campaign around this female basketball player, Lisa Leslie, and had a bunch of clips of her playing, and then at the end, it said this, Ms. Rachel.
You don't win silver, you lose gold.
So talk me through the force of focus there.
I guess the focus is on losing, since they're saying that if you have silver, that means you lost.
Right, and it's a sense of, look, if you were the second best player in the world, you still lost. That's how much we value winning. So again, back to the Detroit Free Press, they were in this position a couple of years ago when the Michigan basketball team became essentially the second best team. They made it all the way to the Final Four, all the way to the final game, and they lost. So, Ms. Rachel, they could have written this in their headline.
You don't win second place, you lose first place.
Do you think they wrote that?
I'm hoping they didn't.
This is what they wrote.
Hail, hail, NCAA runner-up.
What's brilliant about that force of focus move?
Well, it basically focuses on victory rather than defeat.
Yeah, it's a sense of, look, you had this entire season, and what we want to celebrate is that you made it all the way there. They didn't have to do that. This is just through language how you frame an experience. Getting out of sports. So in 2013, there was a Golden Globes. Bill Clinton was one of the presenters. He talked about, I think, the movie Lincoln. So he comes up, everyone's really surprised, they're clapping, everyone's sort of exhilarated, and Amy Poehler tries to capture that experience. And so, Mr. Lewis, Amy Poehler comes on, and she says this.
Wow, what an exciting special guest that was. Hillary Clinton's husband.
Hillary Clinton's husband, right? She doesn't say that was the former president of the United States. That was the former leader of the free world. She says, the most interesting thing about this person, he's married to someone more interesting, right? She's completely reframing who that person is.